Okay, this is a repost of something I discussed a couple of years ago, I think. And I'm reposting it because the subject of this conversation came up today with someone who I was not internet connected with previously. So I'm reposting it for that person's benefit and anyone else who might give a damn. This is the story of how my parents came to meet one another. And the story is that my father and mother's families, my father and mother both come from very long generations. They each came from a family of 7 children that was spread out over a number of years. So it's not bam, 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 7 kids. No, it takes quite a good bit of history to set my mother and father's families into motion. And because of that, my history goes quite a long ways in only 3 generations. Now, my father's grandparents were all slaves in Noxubee County, Mississippi. My mother's grandparents were all slaves somewhere in Kentucky. I'm not sure just where. The story with my mother's grandparents is like this. Nearing the end of the Civil War, General Sherman, the War of Yankee Aggression, General Sherman's armies had moved south and had gone through the Carolinas and Georgia, and then were heading back north through Kentucky, where my mother's grandparents had been born as slaves. And their plantation owner, the people who owned my great-grandparents, since by this point the Union was doing as much pillaging and looting as they were fighting battles, did not want his valuables falling into the hands of the Union Army, staunch Confederate. So he decided to give one piece of property to each of his slaves. I don't know how he decided who got what. But my mother's grandmother got a silver spoon from his dinner service, pure silver. And he gave all his slaves one piece of his property each and pointed them towards the Ohio River and said, if you make it across, you're free, you're on your own. My great-grandmother made it across with her silver spoon. Now this spoon is pure silver. I've seen it, I've used it. It is the most perfectly balanced thing that you fit into your hand I can imagine. It feels like it's not even there. It's so closely balanced, so well balanced and so well made. But because it's pure silver, you can't use it for anything other than soup. It's too soft for anything hard or crunchy. So my great-grandmother made it across the Ohio River into Cincinnati, where she lived, where my grandmother was born, where most of my mother's sisters were born, before they then migrated north to Chicago. The silver spoon passed down from my great-grandmother to my grandmother, and then to my mother, out of 7 kids. I don't know why, but my mother ended up with this silver spoon. She would take it out from time to time and just look at it, realizing this was the value of my grandmother. And she would polish her spoon with silver polish. She kept it in a velvet bag. And she would take it out from time to time and just admire it, polish it, put it back in the buffet. Now, when my mother died a few years ago, that spoon passed to my youngest sister, who has it now. And it's a memento of the value of my great-grandmother, who was not a person, she was property. I don't know anything about the other grandparents from my mother's side. My father's grandparents were all slaves in Noxubee County, Mississippi. They were tenant farmers after the end of the Civil War. They were freed at the end of the Civil War, and they stayed, and they farmed a piece of land that they eventually saved enough money to buy a piece of land for their own, and they farmed it. Then in the early 30s, my grandfather, on my father's side, came to Chicago on his own, by himself, to work at the Swift meatpacking plant in Chicago to send money home to Mississippi to my grandmother and her 7 children. One of her 7 children, my Uncle Luther, was hell on wheels. He was tall, he was scary tall, about 6'6", and if he weighed 200 pounds, it was on a good day. But he was mean and ornery, and he would fight anybody, anywhere, anytime. The problem with that is he got into the habit of fighting white men and whooping their asses, which in Noxubee County was not a good thing. And after a while, the gentlemen of culture in the county decided they'd had enough, and they were going to do something about it. Well, one of these gentlemen of culture had a conscience, because my grandmother did work for him. She did sewing and some other types of housework for this gentleman, and he had a guilty conscience. He felt bad. So he came to their farm and told them, Miss Seabury, you all got to get out of here. The Klan is coming back here tonight. They've had enough of Luther. They're going to come here tonight, and they're going to kill everybody in this place, and they're going to burn your farm to the ground. And my grandmother did not wait a minute. They did not take anything, no possessions. They didn't pack clothes. They didn't pack goods. They got in their wagon. They rode their wagon to the nearest train station and simply left, because they knew there would be no one to help. If there was a sheriff in the county, he was either part of the group that was coming to kill them all, or he'd look the other way. They simply left, never went back, went to Chicago, and eventually that's where my mother and father met one another, got married in 1951. I was born a little while after that. And that's the story of my great-grandparents.